Hello and welcome to Middle East Eye Live. Join us as we take another look at what's happening in the world. We are broadcasting live to YouTube from Middle East Eye's headquarters here in London. I'm Matilda Mallinson. Today is Tuesday, the 15th of April. Coming up. We are spotlighting Israel's war on healthcare in Gaza today, following yet another airstrike on a hospital, the second of its kind just this week. And we'll be hearing from Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, who has just left Gaza City, about the impact on the ground. We will then turn to Yemen for our deep dive. We're tracing a multi-year-long Middle East Eye investigation into the murky politics of a global arms trade that has sidelined civilian casualties over and over again. And I'll be speaking to Senior Investigations Editor Danya Akkad about that. But first, let's take a look at the headlines. Sudan has denied reports it sought normalization meetings with Israel in exchange for political support. Foreign Minister Ali Youssef al-Sharif told Middle East Eye this weekend. Earlier this month, Sudanese news reported that Lieutenant General al-Sadiq Ismail, envoy to Sudanese Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, made a secret visit to Tel Aviv to discuss normalization efforts with Israel. Although Sudan agreed to the Abraham Accords on Israeli-Arab normalization in 2021, the formal signing was postponed due to the outbreak of civil war between Burhan and his rival Hamdan Hemeti Daglo, leader of the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. The civil war remains destructive in Sudan, despite the army reclaiming the capital city of Khartoum in early April. This week, the RSF killed hundreds of people in North Darfur as they advanced on the state capital of El Fasher. It comes days after Sudan took the UAE to The Hague, accusing it of complicity in genocide by arming and supporting the RSF.
Half of the Sudan to address the facts. As I will explain, including by reference to UN sources, there can be no doubt that the Masalit people is currently being subjected to genocide, and that there is serious evidence that the UAE is failing to prevent this.
This is Miss Rachel.
A picture of two babies in Gaza, and their thighs are like this small. We can't let children starve. That is not who we are. Over 14,000 precious children have been unalived in Gaza. Gaza has the largest number of child amputees in history. We can't be silent about these kinds of conditions for children. We can't. We want this to be a world where this kind of thing can't happen. So we need to speak out.
A self-described watchdog organization called Stop Anti-Semitism has accused that YouTube children's educator of promoting anti-Israeli propaganda to her 20 million followers. Miss Rachel has expressed solidarity with Palestinian children suffering war to many, many millions online. In a tweet posted earlier this week, ex-account Stop Anti-Semitism called on the US Attorney General to investigate Ms. Rachel for amplifying, quote, Hamas propaganda, citing statistics they deem false regarding Palestinian child casualties. But their post prompted widespread condemnation across social media, with many accusing the group of smearing a beloved educator and of weaponizing the term anti-Semitism to silence valid criticism of Israel's war on Gaza. Ms. Rachel has not responded to the claims and has continued sharing support for Palestinian children on her page. And finally, Harvard University says it won't surrender to an ultimatum by President Donald Trump overstating interference into university governance. Lawyers for the Ivy League university have accused the government of violating Harvard's constitutional freedom of speech in a defiant letter sent on Monday. It follows a list of demands sent by the government alongside threats to review $9 billion of federal funds and grants. The demands, issued by Trump's so-called Federal Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism, include reforms to leadership, international admissions, diversity hiring, and more. Harvard's lawyers argue that these invade freedoms long recognised by the Supreme Court and state that Harvard will not surrender its independence. And now onto our main story of the day: Israeli attacks on hospitals in Gaza, including a further bombing just this morning. Welcome to MEE's Spotlight. Today, we're looking at Israeli attacks on hospitals in Gaza. Since October 2023, at least 36 hospitals have been burned and bombed by the Israeli military, including with 2,000-pound bombs made in the United States. This morning, a hospital staff member was killed and 9 people wounded in another attack, this time in Khan Yunis. It follows an attack on the Baptist Al-Ahli Hospital on Palm Sunday. MEE spoke to the acting director, Fadel Naim.
The Israeli airstrikes targeted the hospital, especially the main emergency part of this hospital, the emergency department, the emergency X-ray department, the laboratory of the hospital, and the pharmacy were targeted and demolished, destructed totally.
3 weeks ago, we heard from voluntary medic Dr. Mohammed Mustafa in Gaza City that hospitals were already struggling to cope, having been starved of supplies and electricity by Israel's ongoing aid blockade.
I don't know how to stress enough how little we have. We're injuring these children by using adult-sized equipment to help them breathe. I feel like I'm the one harming these children as well. We don't have medications. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the medical professionals to help, and I'm really struggling. I'm really struggling to help these kids, and I just want anyone just to hear us and just to help us out.
Since then, the situation has worsened still. Israel has bombed the city's final fully functioning hospital, and the UN has declared the worst humanitarian crisis in Gaza since Israel's attacks began. At least 3 Palestinian patients, including a child being treated for head injuries, were killed in Sunday's attack at Al-Ahli Hospital, but the damage to life-saving infrastructure is hard to quantify. Days before, Dr. Mustafa left Gaza City with a UN convoy. He landed in his Australian hometown just a few hours ago, and he's joining us now to explain the wider impact of these attacks. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, thank you for joining us again. Gaza City's last fully functioning hospital was attacked days after you left, and another in Khan Yunis this morning. How did you feel when you heard this news?
I was completely devastated, to be honest. I just want to try and paint a picture for the people. That emergency department is about 5 meters wide and 15 meters long. That's the emergency department for 1 million people in Gaza. That's it. That was what was destroyed. It was an 8-bed facility. And when we get a mass casualty event and we get hundreds of people in, it is that 5 by 15 meter small space that we use to try and save as many people as possible. And now that's been destroyed. There's nothing left. There's no ER to take people in. There's nowhere to stabilize patients. The pharmacy was also destroyed as well, and the blood bank was destroyed as well. So we now don't have blood to give, and obviously you can imagine the kind of injuries that we get. We require a lot of blood, and now we don't have any medicine either in that hospital. And also that hospital had the only functioning CT scanner in the whole north of Gaza. From what I know, the CT scanner is functioning, but there's no patients coming to that hospital. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at 1 million people who are being starved and bombed, and nowhere for them to have any kind of access to any form of healthcare.
I know that attempts are being made now to transfer patients from these hospitals to other facilities, but you told us weeks ago these are already overwhelmed. What will the domino effect of this attack be on the city's entire medical infrastructure, including hospitals like Al-Aqsa, where you were working?
So, I've been to Gaza twice now, and I've worked in multiple hospitals across Gaza, and I've seen the hospital facilities that we have. There's no hospital that's fully functioning in the whole of Gaza, and there are a lot of them lack very basic medical equipment. The issue is not necessarily the lack of medical care. It's now these continuous attacks now on healthcare facilities that seem to be occurring more and more regularly and more viciously. When I was there, Nasser Hospital was bombed. When I was working at Al-Aqsa Hospital, it was bombed while we were in the hospital as well. And obviously, Al-Ahli Hospital, the Baptist Hospital, was bombed, and that was a hospital that I'd worked in for 2 weeks as well. So this has all occurred within the last 40 days, these bombings of all of these hospitals. What my worry is that this is going to be a continuing trend now, is that every hospital is going to be getting hit more and more frequently. And like I said, we lack basic equipment anyway. So when you destroy the only blood bank, when you destroy the only ER, when you destroy the only pharmacy, that's another lifeline gone in Gaza, and there's not many of them left.
Did I understand you right that there's a fear, there is a concerted attack targeting healthcare facilities, that this is, these are not coincidental.
Yeah.
This is a strategy.
Yeah. That's what it feels like. And when you work on the ground in Gaza, you begin to understand, where, neurosurgery is performed, where cardiothoracics are, where the pediatric surgical unit is, where the oxygen cylinders are. And you get targeted strikes in small areas of the hospital that are, like the power grids or the motor for the hospital or the solar panels. They get shot at first. Then, the oxygen cylinders get taken out. Then a building gets taken out. Then they destroy the entire ER. So, this is very, very calculated. The kind of medicines that we are allowed to take in are shrinking, what we're allowed to take in and what we're not allowed to take in. And obviously, for the last 6 weeks, there's been nothing that's gone in or out. No medicine, no food, no water. And the force and the magnitudes of the bombings that has been going on in Gaza has only been increasing. When I was there in June last year, when we would have a mass casualty event, maybe about 30 to 40% of the people we could save, and they could have a good outcome. There were some days I was in Gaza this time where there was no work for us to do in the ER because every patient that arrived was dead. This was the magnitude of bombing this time round, which is very different. And, we already, when we go into Gaza, we get told whether we're allowed to go or enter Gaza 6 hours before the bus takes off from Amman, Jordan, to go into Gaza. And we only get clearance the last 6 hours. So doctors fly in from all over the world, arrive in Jordan, have their bags packed. They have their team of however many doctors in that particular NGO, and they have a task and they have patients waiting for them, especially if they're surgeons. And, there was one medical mission that went in last week when I was there. There were a group of 20 doctors, and only 8 of them had been given permission to go in, so 12 of them got rejected. So we are getting healthcare facilities destroyed. We're getting doctors arbitrarily rejected, especially surgeons, from entering Gaza. So yeah, it's beginning to become more and more of an issue. And as the time goes on, the less healthcare facilities there are and the less doctors are being able to get in and the less medical supplies. So Gaza really is on its last limbs.
I probably don't need to remind viewers and listeners that the intentional targeting of hospitals, of medical staff, of civilians is illegal under international law. And if that is indeed the end effect of these attacks, or the end goal of these attacks, then legal consequences would be in question. The Israeli army and Shin Bet Internal Intelligence Agency have, of course, claimed, although this is without sharing evidence, that they targeted a Hamas command and control complex center within Al-Ahli Hospital. We've heard this justification multiple times before when Palestinian hospitals have been hit, including when your workplace, Dr. Mustafa Al-Aqsa Hospital, was bombed in October 2024. Did you see any evidence working in these facilities to support Israel's claims that Hamas is using hospitals as command centers?
Well, look, if we saw Hamas, we're British, we're Australian, we're American NGOs, we're healthcare workers. Our priority is civilians and that includes the hostages as well. We want to bring them home as well. But to claim that a hospital is a command and control center, you literally have hundreds of people walking in and out of the hospital every day. You have multiple reporters, cameras are everywhere. You have multiple NGOs, UN workers, healthcare workers from all around the world. It would be a very silly place to have a command and control center when you have so many eyewitnesses everywhere and so many cameras everywhere. The Al Ahli hospital that was bombed, like I say, the ER was bombed. The ER is 5 meters by 15 meters. Where is the command and control center in that building? Do you know? We've walked around that building every day. I worked in that building. It is minuscule. It is so small. I struggle to understand the justification. I don't know what evidence they have because they don't share it. But what I can tell you is from what I see. What I see in there are women and children that are being treated. I'm seeing injured people being treated, and I'm seeing multiple international aid agencies moving around the hospital freely. There is nowhere in the hospital that I'm not allowed access to. There is no doors that are closed to me. I can move around wherever I want, along with all the other NGOs. We can move freely throughout the hospital. And as a matter of fact, we're not really allowed to leave the hospital. So all we do have is the hospital. So there are people that spend 6 weeks just on the hospital grounds. And, we get to see everything because when I follow up with my patients, I go from the ER department into the wards. It was Ramadan when I was there. A lot of the doctors would pray in the middle of the night, and they would also pray after Maghrib prayer. So we would find areas in the hospital to pray. We would all congregate together. There was nothing that I saw that was, that would give me the inclination of a command and control center. And if there was, I definitely would have made, my seniors aware of it if I had seen anything. But, this is something that we get told over and over again. And the only thing that I can think of as a doctor is this is another healthcare facility that's destroyed. And this means more people now are going to die.
Now, Dr. Mustafa, since we last spoke, you've had quite the journey. How were you able to leave Gaza City? How does it feel now you are reunited with your family, but not being there, knowing what's still going on?
I'm just overwhelmed with guilt, to be honest. I didn't want to leave. I was told it was too dangerous for me, and I told that I had to leave. I have the nurses, I have patients, all messaging me still. There are tears, there's fear. They don't know what to do. When that ER building is destroyed, all of those doctors and nurses, they don't have a job anymore. They don't have access to an income. Obviously, they get moved around to other hospitals, but it's not easy to move from one hospital to another in the middle of a war zone. The movement of people is something that's very, very dangerous. So for me, it's been very, very difficult. It's very difficult to look at a child because of the amount of children that I saw killed in front of me. It's very difficult to eat a warm meal with chicken and meat and all that kind of stuff because that was something I just didn't eat the whole time I was there. And you can see how malnourished everybody is when you go in. And I remember before I left, I was given some bread and some cheese. And they told me, because it's a long journey when you go through multiple security checkpoints, and it takes about 12 hours to go from Gaza to Jordan. And it's only a 3-hour journey, but it takes 12 hours from all the security checks. And I was given some bread and cheese, and they told me to make some sandwiches. And I handed the bag back over, and I said, look, the world stopped food getting into Gaza. I'm not going to sit here and take food out of Gaza. So you keep it, and I'll be fine. And that's how difficult it was. I couldn't believe that, I couldn't believe that even that there, it meant someone was going to eat just by me not giving, it's such a small act, but this is how desperate the situation is over there. This is how little resources we have. This is how little food there is. It is a death camp. It is a death camp. There's no other word to describe it. It is a death camp. You have missiles raining down everywhere. Drones are constantly heard. There's nowhere that is safe. UN safe houses were hit, hospitals were hit, ambulances were hit, the streets are hit, markets are hit. There's nowhere that is safe in Gaza, and we felt that the whole time we were there. There were moments where we felt like we were going to die, and that's not hyperbole. That's not me exaggerating. We really felt that we were going to die. There were moments where we felt like this was over for everybody. And it's just a very, very scary. It's a very scary place to go and work. Don't get me wrong. I don't regret my decision going, and I want to be back. I'm desperate to get back there and to help, but it's not for the faint-hearted. It really is not for the faint-hearted.
Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, at this very late hour where you are, thank you for joining us. That was Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, who has just returned to Australia from Gaza City. Now, Gaza is not the only place to have witnessed successive Israeli attacks on healthcare. Middle East Eye tracked this pattern playing out in Lebanon in a 20-minute documentary, and you can find it on our YouTube channel, Under Fire, Israel's War on Medics. You can also read ongoing coverage of Gaza on our website, middleeasteye.net. But up next, we turn our focus to Yemeni civilians being killed in airstrikes and the international arms trade driving the conflict. This is MEE Live's Deep Dive. Today we're looking at the often forgotten collateral damage of airstrikes in Yemen. Yemen's death toll is growing after suspected US airstrikes in Sana'a killed at least 7 people and injured 29 on Monday, according to the Houthi rebels occupying the capital city. At least 123 people have been killed since the start of the intense airstrike campaign, launched nearly a month ago by President Donald Trump after the Houthis' retaliatory attacks against Israel's aid blockade of Gaza. The US military's Central Command did not acknowledge Monday's strikes and have also not provided information on the 200 strikes it says has been conducted so far, obscuring clear numbers of the civilian impact. But when 5 children were killed at the start of the US campaign, the main controversy was not civilian deaths so much as the accidental adding of a journalist to the signal group that coordinated the strikes. Yemeni civilians have long suffered as collateral damage of proxy and civil warfare, which has turned the country upside down for over a decade. Since 2015, Saudi Arabia has led a military campaign against the Houthis in Yemen, enabled by British and US weaponry, despite mounting evidence of thousands of civilians being killed and international protests against the supply of arms. Both US and UK arms sales to Saudi Arabia continue today, and currently the UK's biggest arms buyer, the UAE, faces accusations in the International Court of Justice of arming genocide in Sudan. As conflict intensifies across the Middle East, there are mounting questions about apparent impunity for state-sponsored civilian killings. How do nations, claiming leading status in international law and human rights, justify their role in mass civilian casualties? How are those decisions made? And how does civil society around the world hold their governments to account? One Middle East Eye reporter spent 2 years seeking answers to these questions, working alongside arms trade researcher Anna Stavrianakis. Joining us now is MEE investigative journalist Danya Akkad. Danya, welcome to the studio.
Hi, thanks for having me, Matilda. It's great to be here.
Now, your investigation begins with one of the deadliest single civilian airstrikes in Yemen, the Great Hall attack in October 2016. What happened during this attack, and why is it so significant in this story?
Yeah, so this attack was on a funeral in Sana'a. It was in an afternoon, and it was actually a funeral for the Houthi-led the father of the Houthi-led government's interior minister, and there were over 1,000 people at this funeral in Sana'a. The date and place had been announced on. Can you not hear me? Sorry, we're okay? Go ahead. Okay. The date and place had been announced on Facebook, and when the strike happened, it happened in two stages. It's called what we call a double tap. So there was one airstrike initially, and then shortly afterwards there was another strike. And actually, according to Mawatana, a Yemen human rights organization that documented this, there may have been also a third strike, witnesses said. So 155 people were killed in the attack, and hundreds of others were wounded. And the thing is, the attack wasn't so unusual for the war in Yemen up until that point, in the sense that other civilian spaces had been hit, schools, factories, hospitals. So it wasn't unusual, but what was jarring about it, and why Anna Stavrianakis and I focused on it, was because of the scale of it. It was the largest single loss of life in the war. And so for the public, and also for governments that were okaying exports of weapons to countries involved in it, it was jarring. And this is why Anna and I spent 3 years filing freedom of information requests with the UK government to try to get to the bottom of how this attack changed government policy or didn't. We wanted to know what officials were talking about after the attack happened, to know whether they were concerned that this was the moment that they should stop selling arms to Saudi. And so that's what our 3-year-long journey was about.
So this was the biggest single civilian casualty attack. But can you give us a sense of how much, how big the civilian impact has been over the course of the Saudi Arabian airstrikes in Yemen enabled by UK and US weaponry over the past 10 years?
Yeah, so between 2015 and 2022 March is when the Saudi-led coalition airstrikes stopped, and March 2015 is when it started. From then until then, according to the Yemen Data Project, 19,226 civilians were killed from airstrikes. So that's a lot. That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people. And can you give us a sense now of how much the UK government has profited from these sales?
Yeah, so the UK, along with the US, is one of Saudi Arabia's leading arms suppliers. And it also is a major supplier, as you were saying before, to the United Arab Emirates, which was part of the Saudi-led coalition. And according to the Campaign Against Arms Trade, a figure that they put out last year, the published value, so the value that the government sort of puts on paper of what it sold to the Saudi-led coalition, was 9.7 billion pounds. But CAT actually estimates that the real value is more than 29 billion pounds to Saudi alone, and nearly 31 billion in total to the coalition. And that has to do with open licenses and different kinds of licenses, but that's their estimate. So also quite a bit of money.
Thank you for breaking that down. I think that gives us a really clear picture of what we're looking at. Those civilian lives on the one hand, and the profits from arms sales on the other. Now, as you said, you have spent 3 years trying to understand how much the UK government knew about how their weapons were being used, filing FOI after FOI. That sounds like a lot of fun. What did you learn? How much did they know, and why did they continue to provide them?
Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to back up here and just explain a little bit about how the government decides whether to license arms sales, so that I can explain what we were actually looking for. So weapons, the UK government wasn't itself selling weapons to Saudi or the UAE. It was private companies, obviously. And the UK government was deciding whether or not these sales should be licensed. And so the government has this list of criteria. It's got a really cool name, the Strategic Export Licensing Criteria, SELC, people call it. I know this is the world's sexiest story, and it uses these criteria to decide whether it's going to okay an export. And one of the most important criteria, the criteria that comes up a lot for us in our reporting, is whether there's a clear risk that a government that the UK weapons are being sold to, whether there's a clear risk that those weapons might be used later in serious violations of international humanitarian law. So the measure is clear risk that weapons might be used. It's not even that weapons have been used, it's that they might be used. So clearly in Yemen, civilian spaces were being hit, and clearly US and UK weapons were being used by the Saudi-led coalition. So you had these two things going. And what Anna and I wanted to know was, how had the government assessed the risk of UK weapons being used in attacks that could hit civilians. How had it assessed it after this attack happened? And I guess we can talk a bit more about this, but we came to find out that we couldn't find out a lot about this, and that's problematic.
Right, I see. So I wanted to ask what proof there is that the UK government knew their weapons were resulting in such massive civilian casualties. It sounds like that was established knowledge. Am I hearing that right?
No, it was more that what they were assessing within the government was whether there was a clear risk that their weapons might be used. So in terms of our investigation, I never came upon information that showed that the government had proof that its weapons were being used. Of course, I think definitely U.S. weapons were later established as being involved in that Great Hall attack. So there's all kinds of different forensic investigations that happened showing which weaponry was used where. But in terms of our investigation, I didn't find any proof per se that the UK government knew that its weapons had been used in the Great Hall attack. But what I was trying to establish was whether the fact that it had happened at all raised concerns about the sale of those weapons.
Okay, I see. But of course, global outrage at the Great Hall attack, while it did prompt Washington to block a major US weapon sale to Saudi Arabia, did not see the same consequences in the UK. As you detail in your investigation, the UK continued providing arms after this event. Why did the UK not follow the US's example here?
Yeah, that was exactly our question. And this is what prompted us to get into this, because so clearly it had been the Americans had been so public about their reaction to it, or at least public a little bit about what they thought, and they had made a change in their arms export, in their arms exports. And this hadn't happened on the British side. And so that was the question going into this. And after 3 years, I still can't really tell you why not.
I suppose that is the story then. The story is that we can't trace this. And of course, this is something that should be publicly accountable, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing. This is one of those investigations where it was, we have this saying in Arabic, Mafi jawab, jawab. No answer is the answer. And we tried for 3 years to get a clear answer about how this attack may have changed exports, and we couldn't get that answer. We tried FOIAs, and then we went through the front door to ask these questions, and we couldn't get answers. But in the course of our reporting, or actually towards the end of our reporting, a civil servant came forward, a whistleblower, and actually published in The Guardian saying that he'd been on the inside when decisions were made about the Yemen during the Yemen war, and that in fact there was a high-level meeting in which it was decided that it was time to stop the exports, that the clear risk had been met, but that those sales continued anyway. One question that that Anna and I had was, well, was that the Great Hall attack when that happened, when that decision was made, but it was, put aside? We put that to the Foreign Office. We also asked the civil servant, Mark Smith, who put this op-ed out in The Guardian about all of this. And the Foreign Office didn't answer us on that. And Mark Smith didn't respond to a request for interview. So it's a lingering question. Mm-hmm. And I think what our investigation shows is just that we don't know as a public sometimes what's happening with arms exports decision making. And when I say as a public, I include MPs in that. So it makes it really hard for us to scrutinize and hold our governments to account when we don't actually know the details.
Okay, so we do know from Mark Smith's account that concerns were raised internally. And we do know that the US responded by, at least temporarily, stopping these arms sales. Did the government do anything in reaction to indications of the civilian harm being wreaked? Did you learn about any changes or decisions being made?
Yeah, so after 15 FOIAs, at the very last FOIA, we got like this long bit of emails. And in those emails, it became clear, one, that they were very concerned after the Great Hall attack had happened. And they said something like, I'm going to get the wording wrong, but it was something like, it's becoming a finely balanced a finely balanced exercise. So they were already concerned about Saudi Arabia's risks with international humanitarian law, even before this attack. So we learned that. And the second thing is, we know that this attack prompted officials to create what they called, again, I can't remember the exact terminology, but essentially a plan in case it was assessed that the clear risk had been met. So it shows you that they were very concerned and that they were preparing to, I think, potentially stop exporting or to make some kind of change to the exports. But as far as we can tell, that didn't happen. Why? We don't know.
Okay. In 2019, however, the UK was forced to suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And this was because of legal action by civil society organizations. There were massive, massive protests. But just a year later, those arms sales resumed. How did the government get away with that?
So this is a bit complicated, and I won't go into all the details of it, but essentially the High Court ruled that those sales could start again. And as I understand it, it's not so much that the High Court decided, went into all the details of what the government had assessed and marked its homework and said yes or no. It's that the High Court found that the government had done homework, that the government had a process for checking whether there was clear risk involved with weapons there was a clear risk that weapons could be used in the violation of international humanitarian law. The government assessed as it said it would, and therefore it could continue exporting arms. It wasn't so much the detail of it, but more the process of it that the High Court said okay to. So, yeah, that's what happened.
Okay. So civil society took action to hold its government to account, and ultimately it was a legal technicality that overcame that. And journalists at Middle East Eye have spent several years trying to get transparency on what was actually happening, and you haven't succeeded. Is it fair to say that overall, the process seems pretty murky, and accountability, especially as we look at the rising numbers of civilian casualties in Yemen, seems like a distant concept?
Yeah. I think there's a lot more transparency work that could be done about arms exports. There's not currently a dedicated committee within the government looking at this, and a lot of the MPs I've talked to over the course of the past couple of years are not well informed on what's going on, and are constantly asking questions and not really getting a lot of answers. And I think in the case of Yemen and in Gaza, it would seem clear to anyone in the public that civilians are not only at clear risk of being hit, but are being hit. And so for me, Mark Smith, who came forward, the civil servant who blew the whistle, was a really important voice. Even though Anna and I could never get exact clarity about what had happened behind the closed doors, I think it's important to continue asking these questions. And I think one last thing is that I think what Mark Smith made us realize, and how he described the culture of the Foreign Office with these arms export questions, is that it may be very hard to find a smoking gun when it comes to these topics. But yet again, I think we need to keep asking these questions if we're going to watchdog and hold people accountable.
And Middle East Eye audiences can be assured that Danya will continue asking those questions. Danya Akkad, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You can read Danya's full investigation with Anna Stavrianakis on our website, middleeasteye.net. That is all that we have time for today, but thank you so much for tuning in to MEE Live. Before we lose you, we want to hear from you. If you send us in your thoughts, your questions, we will take a look at them in future episodes. You can contact us on any social media platform at Middle East Eye, or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. Now make sure you tune in for future shows. We are here every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. BST, or noon if you are in New York or on Eastern Time. See you then.